So, you wanna use your Magsorc in PvP, but every time you try something out you feel like a wet spaghetti noodle getting obliterated before you could even use Hardened Ward. Tired of being treated like a Raggedy Ann doll by DK Chad and his warden buddies that hold his pocket more than a prison yard girlfriend? Or maybe you're simply like me, wanting to use the character you forever loved deeply but have a hard time competing against the latest metas. Well, I have the build for you. Something I rated as AB level PvP setup that's somewhat old school but simply gets the job done, and if it doesn't you're definitely going to annoy the hell out of Chad and his buddies. But before we get into any of the build, check out some gameplay footage and some scorecards I have collected on the way of making this build. It's been a great build, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I have over this last campaign here in the arena of Tamriel. So now that you have seen some footage without my AI voice ruining the video, it's time to go over the build. First up on our front bar we are going to be using the Ice Staff of Wretched Vitality in the trait Defending to get the most resistance. Equipping an Ice Staff reduces the cost of blocking by 36% and increases the amount of damage you block by 20%. And instead of running an enchantment on the Ice Staff we will be using Poison, which may surprise many of you, but I found running the Escapist's Poison, which grants us immunity from control effects for 3.9 seconds and will also help us break free from control effects. Very useful with the amount of crowd control effects and stuns the current metas are using. Next up on our back bar we will be using a crafty Alfeex Inferno Staff in the trait Charge to help us apply status effects by 365%. With the Absorb Magicka enchantment that deals 2128 magic damage and restores 354 magicka. For our lovely monster set we will be running a Heavy Mighty Chuden's Mask to gain an extra 1487 armor and to gain Major Resolve at all times, increasing our physical and spell resistance by 5948. That will also be in the trait Impenetrable for more critical resistance, and since it's a heavy it will also increase our resistance in general. And to keep a mag cool, big R enchantment is going to be Maximum Magicka for an extra 702 magicka on the helm. Since we have one free slot available, for our chest we will be using a heavy one piece of the trainee. In the trait Reinforced for the maximum amount of resistances, and for that piece we will be using a multi-effect enchantment increasing all three pools by 434 through 477. Next up is our monster shoulder piece, the Heavy Mighty Chuden's Epaulettes, with the trait Impenetrable to once again really max out on resistances on the build. For the waist we will be running a light sash of the crafty Alfeex in the trait Impenetrable, with the enchantment being a maximum magicka enchant to increase our magicka by 284. For the hands we will be using medium bracers of the Wretched Vitality in the trait Impenetrable, with the enchantment being maximum magicka to increase our magicka yet again by 351. For our legs we will be running heavy Wretched Vitality Greaves in the trait Reinforced to increase our armor value once again by 16%. And our enchantment is going to be a maximum magicka enchant to increase our magicka by 868. And for a pro tip, I highly encourage to run Reinforced for both chest and legs on almost all builds for better sustain and resistances. Next up is our boots, which will be a medium Wretched Vitality in the trait Impenetrable to really push critical resistances to save us from those shadow monsters who really like to reach out and touch you from behind. And the enchantment will also be a maximum magicka enchant, adding another 351 magicka to our pool. For our first jewelry piece we will be running a crafty Alfeex necklace in the trait Arcane to increase our maximum magicka by 877 with a weapon and spell enchantment increasing our spell damage by 174. For our lovely mythic we will be running Marken Ring of Majesty to gain 100 weapon and spell damage and 1157 armor for each set we're wearing more than 3 pieces of, giving us the bonus of an extra 200 weapon and spell damage and 2314 armor. The trait will be infused to increase our weapon and spell damage enchantment effectiveness by 60%, giving our weapon and spell damage enchantment 278 weapon and spell damage instead of 174. Last but not least, our second ring will be a ring of crafty alphiques. In the trait Arcane to increase our magicka pool one last time, and our enchantment will also be a weapon and spell damage enchant, increasing our weapon and spell damage by 174. Alright, so now that you have the gear down, here is a picture of my stats to use as a reference on where you need to be. Keep in mind these stats are unbuffed. So now you know the build and you know the stats, it's time we go over the skills. And since I've dragged you creatures of Tamriel on for so long, I'm going to try and keep this fast and simple as possible while still giving you the information you need. So for your front bar, or if you recall our ice staff bar, we will use this bar for our buffs, heals, and dots. Starting off with Elemental Drain, this will be your main debuff when casted on an enemy, which will send the elements to sap an enemy's defenses and afflict them with major breach for 1 minute. Reducing their physical and spell resistance by 5,948. Also applies minor magicka steal to the enemy for 1 minute, causing you and your allies to restore 168 magicka every 1 second when damaging them. Next up is our second buff, Critical Surge. When activated, invoke Meridia's name to gain major brutality and sorcery, increasing your weapon and spell damage by 20% for 33 seconds. While active, dealing critical damage heals you for 3,300 health. This effect can occur once every 1 second. For our third skill, we will be using Dark Conversion. When activated, bargain with darkness to restore 10,000 health and 4,500 magicka instantly, and an additional 3,000 magicka over 20 seconds. Our fourth skill is Haunting Curse for a great dot that honestly got me more kills than not. When activated, curse an enemy with a destructive rune, dealing 10,972 magic damage to the target and 4,756 magic damage to all other nearby enemies after 3.5 seconds. The curse will continue to haunt the enemy and explode a second time, dealing 10,927 magic damage to the target and 4,756 magic damage to all other nearby enemies after an additional 8.5 seconds. You can have only one Haunting Curse active at a time. For our final skill on our ice staff bar, aka our front bar, we will be using Resolving Vigor. When activated, let loose a battle cry, instilling yourself with resolve and healing for 17,556 health over 5 seconds. After casting, you gain minor resolve, increasing your physical and spell resistance by 2,974 for 20 seconds. Now on to our back bar, which will be our crafty Alphique's Inferno staff. For our first skill on this bar, we will be running Crystal Fragments, allowing us to conjure dark crystals to bombard an enemy, dealing 9,462 magic damage. Your next non-ultimate ability cast within 3 seconds costs 10% less. While slotted, casting a health, magicka, or stamina ability has a 33% chance of causing your next crystal fragments to be instant, deal 66% more damage, and cost 50% less magicka. Next up will be our Execute, Endless Fury. When activated, call down lightning to strike an enemy, dealing 3,467 shock damage. If the enemy falls to or below 20% health within 4 seconds of being struck, an explosion deals an additional 12,713 shock damage to them and 2,631 shock damage to other enemies nearby. If any enemy is killed within 5 seconds of being hit with this ability, you restore 4,860 magicka. This execute has to be one of my favorite executes in game, simply because you can use this at a distance. But you can also use it before the enemy dies and get him to low health yourself to still cause the explosion and finish them off. Next up is our third skill, which will be our main spammable while light weaving. Crushing Shock focuses all the elemental energies with your staff and blast an enemy for 2,654 flame damage, 2,654 frost damage, and 2,773 shock damage. Enemies hit while casting are interrupted, set off balance, and stun for 3 seconds. For our main form of protection, our fourth skill is going to be Hardened Ward. Now throughout the video I am sure you asked yourself why so much magicka. Well, the answer is simple, because when Hardened Ward is active, conjure globes of Daedric energy for protection, granting a damage shield for you and your pets that absorbs 19,259 damage for 6 seconds. This ability scales off the higher of your max health or magicka and is capped at 72% of your max health. So the higher your mag or health pool is, the greater shield you will have. Plus we're a mag build, so who doesn't like having 40,000 magicka? Last but not least, for our non-ultimate skills, we have Streak, which believe me is the most annoying thing you could possibly use in a fight, but it's also your main source of survivability. When activated, transform yourself into pure energy and flash forward, dealing 5,436 shock damage to enemies in your wake and stunning them for 3 seconds. This effect cannot be blocked. Casting again within 4 seconds costs 33% more magicka. And now for our ultimates. For the first one, I personally run charged Adranak only because I personally don't have Meteor on this build. But it allows teammates to activate the synergy to gain Major Berserk for 8 seconds. So I figured for group gameplay it wasn't that bad and makes the enemies move around a bit too. And for our second ultimate I use Dawnbreaker of Smiting, dealing 14,067 physical damage to enemies in front of you, an additional 16,881 physical damage over 6 seconds and stunning them for 2 seconds. Well, that's it for the build. I hope whoever, if anyone, copies this build enjoys it as much as I have these past few weeks. And if you'd like to support me and want to see more videos like this in the future on a different class, please subscribe and hit the like button down below. And maybe comment what you'd like to see next. Thank you all, and keep on dueling here in the arena of Tamriel.